"You'll never be good enough for this family." Those words, spat out by my daughter-in-law Clara, cut through me sharper than any knife. I was standing in my own dining room, carrying a tray of peach cobbler I had baked with trembling hands. My chest tightened, my knees nearly buckled, but I steadied myself. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Then maybe your father can keep you under his roof instead of me paying for yours." The room fell silent. My son, Daniel, froze, the color draining from his face. "Roof? What roof?" he stammered. And in that single moment, my entire life of sacrifices, of love taken for granted, unraveled before everyone's eyes. My name is Evelyn, and I am 80 years old. That evening will forever remain etched into my memory, not because of the peach cobbler or the neatly polished silverware on the table, but because it was the night I realized that sometimes, love without boundaries becomes a weapon used against you. For almost a year, I had been secretly paying Daniel and Clara's mortgage $1,100 every single month. I had told myself it was temporary, just until Daniel got back on his feet after his so-called career change. He said he needed time, that opportunities would come. And like the mother who raised him through storms, hunger, and sleepless nights, I said yes. But here is what I never imagined: while I was rationing my medication for high blood pressure, while I was patching up my shoes with glue because I couldn't afford new ones, they were out at fancy restaurants, posting pictures of champagne toasts and designer handbags. Every photo Clara shared on social media was a reminder that while I lived frugally, she lived like royalty on my sacrifice. That evening, the dining room was set the way my late husband would have loved: a lace tablecloth, candles flickering in tall holders, and the smell of roasted lamb with rosemary filling every corner. Daniel always said lamb reminded him of Easter Sundays when he was a boy, so I thought perhaps a good meal could soften the tension that had been simmering for months. Clara walked in with a coat draped across her shoulders that looked like it belonged on the pages of a fashion magazine. Daniel followed, fidgeting with his wristwatch, avoiding my gaze. I could tell something was brewing. From the very first bite, Clara found faults. The lamb was too seasoned, the mashed potatoes were too rustic, the curtains in my living room looked outdated. She compared me again to her father, a wealthy businessman who, according to her, provided nothing but perfection. Every word was dipped in poison, designed to remind me of what I was not. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold my peace, until the dessert came. Peach cobbler. The same cobbler Daniel once begged me to make every week when he was little. As I set it on the table, I expected at least a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Instead, Clara leaned back, smirked, and said those words, "You'll never be good enough for this family." At that instant, something inside me cracked not with weakness, but with fury. The years of sacrifice, the hidden payments, the swallowed insults, all of it rose to the surface. And with a calm I didn't know I possessed, I fired back. "Then maybe your father can keep you under his roof instead of me paying for yours." The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. His eyes widened as if I had just spoken a foreign tongue. "Roof? What roof?" he demanded. Clara's smirk vanished, her painted lips parting in shock. They both looked at me as if the ground beneath them had shifted, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange, liberating power in telling the truth that had been chained inside me for far too long. Daniel's voice trembled as he repeated the question, louder this time. "What roof, Mama? What are you talking about?" His fork lay forgotten, his plate untouched, his whole body rigid with disbelief. Clara shifted uneasily in her seat, the smugness evaporating from her face like mist under the sun. Her hands, manicured and polished, clutched her wineglass so tightly that for a second, I thought it might shatter in her grasp. I sat down slowly, my joints aching, but my spirit rising with a force I hadn't felt in decades. "The roof above your heads, Daniel," I said, my voice steady but laced with the fire of months of pent-up frustration. "The mortgage on your precious house on Oak Ridge Avenue, the one you both flaunt to everyone as your pride and joy. For nearly a year, I've been making those payments. $1,100 every month, pulled straight out of my account, while you two have been living as if money falls from the sky. The color drained from Clara's cheeks, leaving her pale beneath the layers of foundation. Daniel blinked rapidly, his lips parting, then closing, as though he were drowning in words he could not speak. "That's not possible," he muttered, shaking his head as if denial alone could turn my truth into a lie. "I told Clara the bank gave me an extension." That day my palm slammed against the table, rattling the silverware and making the candles flicker. "Enough," I snapped, the force of my own voice surprising even me. "You lied, Daniel. You lied to her. You lied to me, and all the while, I have been selling off pieces of my life to keep your house from slipping through your fingers. I pawned your father's old pocket watch. I skipped doses of my medicine so I could stretch the bottle longer. Do you know what it feels like, Daniel? To stand in line at the pharmacy, hands shaking, and tell the clerk you can't afford the full prescription. To smile politely while knowing you've chosen between your health and your child's pride." Clara's mouth fell open, and for the first time since she walked through my door, she had nothing clever to say. Her eyes darted toward Daniel, desperate for him to salvage the facade he had built. "Daniel, tell me she's exaggerating," she pleaded, her voice quivering, stripped of the sharpness she usually carried like a blade. But Daniel's silence was its own confession. He lowered his head into his hands, the weight of his deceit pressing down so heavily that he could no longer meet either of our eyes. I leaned forward, my gaze fixed on him. "When you came to me 11 months ago, you said it was temporary. You stood in my kitchen, tears streaming down your face, telling me that if I didn't help, you and Clara would be out on the streets. You promised me you'd find a stable job within a few months, and I believed you. Because you are my son. Because I carried you into this world when doctors said I couldn't. Because I rocked you through fevers in the middle of the night. Because every part of me wanted to believe in you." My throat tightened, but I didn't let my voice falter. "But what did you give me in return? Not gratitude. Not respect. You gave me lies. You let your wife sit here, belittling me, tearing down my home, my cooking, my life's work, while knowing all the while that her comfort came at my expense." Daniel finally raised his head, his eyes glassy, his lips trembling. "Mama, I thought no." I cut him off sharply. "You didn't think. You deceived. You let me shoulder your burdens while you pretended to be a man in control. Do you know what that did to me, Daniel? It broke me, piece by piece, until tonight. When Clara's words lit the fire, I needed to finally speak. The room pulsed with silence, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Clara stared at Daniel with eyes like daggers, realization dawning that the man she boasted about to her friends was nothing more than a hollow figure propped up by an old woman's sacrifices. "You want to know the truth," I said, my voice low but fierce. "The truth is, Daniel, you have been living not under your own roof, but under mine. Every brick of that house has been paid for by the calluses on my hands, the aches in my bones, and the dignity I've swallowed. And tonight, that ends." I pushed back my chair once more, standing tall despite the years weighing on my back. For the first time in a long while, I felt powerful not because of the money I'd given, but because of the truth I had finally set free. Daniel's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his eyes darting back and forth like a man cornered with no escape. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, her carefully crafted image of superiority slipping like a mask too heavy to hold. I could feel the tension wrap around the room, choking the very air we breathed. For once, I wasn't the one silenced, I was the one demanding to be heard. "Do you know what it means to sacrifice, Clara?" I asked, turning my gaze directly to her. My voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of decades of buried pain. "It means working from dawn to dusk in a laundromat, pressing uniforms for men who never once knew my name. It means sewing until my fingers bled just so my son could have shoes that weren't falling apart on his first day of school. It means walking to church in the dead of winter because bus fare had to be saved for bread. That's sacrifice." Clara shifted uncomfortably in her chair, twisting the napkin in her lap until it tore. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her silence was more revealing than any insult she had ever thrown at me. Daniel finally whispered, "Mama, I never wanted it to get this far. I thought I could fix it before you found out, before I found out." I interrupted, my voice sharp as a blade. "Daniel, I have been living this lie with you for nearly a year. I knew every time I saw Clara carrying shopping bags, every time I saw you post pictures at restaurants, that it was my money keeping that fantasy alive. Don't you dare pretend you meant to fix it. If you had wanted to fix it, you would have gotten a job, any job. Instead of sitting back and letting me bleed myself dry." His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, I saw not the man he was supposed to be, but the little boy I once carried on my hip. He had always looked to me to solve his problems, from broken toys to broken hearts. But this time, I realized, solving it for him would only break me further. Clara's voice finally broke through, high-pitched and defensive. "You make it sound like we forced you. You chose to pay, Evelyn. No one twisted your arm. If you wanted to say no, you should have." I turned slowly toward her, locking eyes with a steadiness that made her shrink back. "You're right," I said softly, though the tremor in my chest betrayed the storm beneath. I chose because I loved my son. I chose because when Daniel came to me, crying that he couldn't feed you, couldn't keep you in your home, I couldn't bear the thought of him feeling like he had failed. That was my mistake, believing that love meant carrying his burdens for him, believing that he would recognize the sacrifice and respect it. Instead, you both treated me like a fool to be mocked at my own table. Daniel's head dropped again, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. Clara glanced at him, then back at me, her voice cracking with false bravado. "My father would never let things get this bad. He built his business from nothing. He provides for us whenever we need it. That's what a real man does." I let out a bitter laugh, low and hollow. "If your father is such a real man, then perhaps you should call him tomorrow and ask him to pay your mortgage. Because I won't be doing it anymore." The words struck like lightning. Clara's eyes widened, panic flickering beneath her carefully drawn eyeliner. Daniel shot upright, knocking over his chair in the process. "Mama, no, you can't just stop now, we'll lose everything." His voice cracked, desperate, stripped of all pretense. I rose to my feet, leaning on the table for support, but my back straightened taller than it had in years. "Everything you have was never truly yours, Daniel. It was mine, and I will not, continue to pay the price for your pride and Clara's cruelty. Tonight, the pretending ends. Starting now, you will live within the truth you've both worked so hard to hide." The candles flickered wildly, as if the room itself shuddered from the finality of my words. For the first time that evening, I saw fear in Clara's eyes, not fear of me, but fear of what her life would look like without the money she had never known came from my wrinkled hands. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a man gasping for air underwater. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her glass of wine, gulping it down as if it could drown the panic rising in her chest. I remained standing, my fingers pressed firmly against the table, drawing strength from its sturdy oak, the same table where birthdays had been celebrated, where prayers had been spoken, where family was supposed to mean something real. "Do you want to know the truth, Daniel?" I said, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "The truth is that while you've been hiding behind excuses, I've been living like a shadow of myself. I sold the brooch your grandmother left me. I stopped buying fresh fruit because canned peaches were cheaper. And every time I wrote that check for the mortgage, I told myself it was an investment in your future. But what kind of future is built on lies?" Daniel dragged his hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he used as a child when he was caught sneaking cookies before dinner. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Mama, please, I just needed time. I lost 2 jobs this year already. Clara didn't know. I didn't want her to see me as weak." Clara's head snapped toward him, her voice shrill. "2 jobs. Daniel, you told me you left those jobs because you were too good for them. You said the companies didn't deserve your talent." Her face flushed crimson, a mix of fury and humiliation. I turned to her, my expression hard. He didn't want you to see the truth, Clara. He didn't want anyone to see the truth that without help, he couldn't keep the life you both parade around as if it's earned. You've both been building castles in the air, while I've been digging myself into the ground. Clara shot out of her chair, her voice rising like thunder. So what? Are you saying we should live like beggars? You expect me to give up the life I've worked for? Her words struck me so deeply that for a moment, I almost laughed. Worked for, I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. What exactly have you worked for, Clara? Expensive dresses, vacations, manicures. Do you know what I worked for? I worked for survival. I worked so that Daniel could grow up with food in his stomach and shoes on his feet. I worked so that one day, he could be proud of his mother. And tonight, here you sit, in my house, spitting in the face of every sacrifice I've ever made. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara's lips quivered, but no sound came out. Daniel stepped forward, his hands outstretched, his voice breaking. Mama, I swear I was going to tell you. I just thought I could fix it before you found out the truth. I didn't want you to think I was a failure. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Failure isn't about losing a job, Daniel. Failure is about letting the woman who gave you life sell her keepsakes, skip her medicine, and eat canned soup every night while you and your wife boast about a life you never earned. That, Daniel, is failure. His knees buckled, and he sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. Clara's fury had twisted into something else now, fear. She knew the safety net she never even realized was there had just been ripped away. I looked at them both, my voice heavy with finality. From this moment on, the roof over your head will no longer be mine to provide. If Clara's father is the great man she claims him to be, perhaps he can take on the burden you've both left me with. But my part in this ends tonight. The ticking of the clock echoed like a drumbeat in the silence that followed. My chest rose and fell with the weight of every truth I had finally spoken. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because the chains of secrecy had shattered at last. Daniel lifted his face slowly, and in his eyes I saw not just sorrow, but the crumbling of the lies he had built stone by stone. His lips parted, but the words caught in his throat. Clara, on the other hand, was pacing like a caged animal, her heels striking the wooden floor with sharp, angry beats. She threw her arms up and cried, "This is ridiculous. Evelyn, you can't just cut us off like that. We'll be ruined." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. "Ruined," I repeated softly. "You speak as though you've built something solid, Clara. But you've built nothing. You've been living in a house of cards, and I've been the one holding it up. When I step away, it doesn't mean you're ruined. It means you'll finally see the truth of what you've created." Daniel's hands shook as he rubbed his temples. "Mama, please. If you stop now, we'll lose the house. We don't even have savings. Clara's parents think we're fine, and if they find out enough..." Clara snapped, her face flushed with panic. "Don't you dare tell them anything, Daniel. They'll think I married a failure." I turned my gaze to her with all the strength my 80 years had given me. "Failure isn't about money, Clara. It's about character. It's about gratitude. And tonight, you've shown me exactly who you are. You've eaten at my table, sneered at my food, mocked my home, while never once realizing that I was the one putting a roof over your head. Tell me, Clara, is that the behavior of someone who knows the meaning of family?" Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she seemed to shrink before me, the confidence stripped from her like paint peeling off an old wall. Daniel finally spoke, his voice broken. "Mama, I didn't want you to see me like this. I've lost 3 jobs in the last 18 months. Every time I told you I was starting something new, it was another lie. I couldn't keep anything steady, and I thought if I pretended, if I kept smiling, maybe you'd still believe in me." His confession hit me like a weight, pressing into my chest. 3 jobs, 18 months, and yet he had stood in my kitchen, tears rolling down his cheeks, promising me it would only take a few weeks. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply before I answered. Daniel, belief is not built on lies. You wanted me to see you as a man, yet you behaved like a frightened child hiding behind his mother's skirts. I cannot respect dishonesty. Not when it has cost me my health, my savings, and the peace of my home. Tears rolled down his cheeks freely now. Clara spun around to face him, her voice shrill. You lied to me too, Daniel. You let me think everything was fine while you let her pay. Do you know how foolish I look now? All those dinners, all those shopping trips, all those nights I told my friends we were secure. And all along, your mother was the one paying for our comfort. Her words dripped with humiliation, but I felt no sympathy. Instead, I straightened my back and said, sometimes the truth humiliates us because it shows who we really are. And tonight, both of you are standing bare before it. The clock on the wall chimed, the sound echoing through the heavy silence. My dining room, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a courtroom, and I was no longer the defendant. I was the judge delivering the verdict. I looked from Daniel to Clara, my voice calm, resolute. The payments stop tonight. You have 30 days to find a way forward. After that, your lives will stand on your own shoulders, not mine. Clara gasped, her face twisting with anger. But Daniel only lowered his head, as though deep down he knew there was no escape from the truth. The moment the words left my lips, Clara's chair screeched against the floor as she shoved it back, standing tall with fury radiating from her eyes. Her red dress shimmered under the chandelier light, but all the elegance she had walked in with had long vanished. 30 days. She shrieked, her voice piercing. You expect us to just figure it out in 30 days? Do you have any idea what that will do to us? She placed her hands on her hips, her chin raised as if defiance could undo the reality I had laid bare. I held her gaze without blinking. Yes, Clara, 30 days. Because for the past 11 months, I've given you more than enough time. Time bought with the money I earned, washing strangers' clothes, cooking in other people's kitchens, and sacrificing the little comfort I had left. Time you wasted mocking me while living on my sacrifice. My tone was steady, though I could feel the ache in my chest, an ache that was not from age or illness but from disappointment so deep it seemed to carve into my very bones. Daniel slumped back into his chair, his head hanging low. Mama, he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. I never thought it would come to this. I was always so sure I'd get another chance, another job. I thought I could hide the truth until things turned around. His shoulders shook, and I realized his pride had finally cracked open, spilling the truth he had buried for far too long. Hide, I repeated bitterly, my eyes narrowing. You didn't hide, Daniel. You deceived. And the worst part isn't the money, it's the silence. Every time you let Clara insult me. Every time you sat quietly while she compared me to her father or belittled the life I built, you betrayed me. A son protects his mother, Daniel, but you chose to protect your lies instead. Clara spun toward him, her eyes blazing. You let me humiliate her without telling me the truth. Her voice shook with rage, but I could see the cracks in her arrogance. She had built her pride on the illusion of security, and now that illusion was crumbling. Do you understand what you've done to me? I've been bragging to everyone that we were fine, that you were successful, and all along we were living off your mother's pity. Daniel raised his head slowly, his eyes bloodshot, his voice breaking. Clara, I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you didn't know, you wouldn't feel ashamed. Protect me. She spat. You made me a fool, Daniel, a fool. Her voice dissolved into sobs, and she collapsed back into her chair, clutching the napkin as if it could shield her from the truth. I watched them, a mix of anger and sorrow twisting in my chest. The son I had sacrificed everything for was broken before me, and the woman he chose to stand by him was unraveling at the seams. But sympathy could no longer guide. MIT had already cost me too much. Do you know what I gave up last week? I asked, my voice low but steady. They both looked at me, their faces streaked with fear and tears. I sold your father's record collection, the one he cherished more than anything. I held on to those vinyls for 25 years after his passing. They were the last piece of him I had left in this house. And I sold them, just to make sure you two had a roof. So don't you dare stand here and tell me about shame. I know shame. I have carried it quietly, with dignity, while you flaunted a life you didn't earn. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Clara wiped her tears with shaking hands, while Daniel stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning. Finally, I straightened my back, gripping the table for support but standing tall. "This is not punishment," I said, my voice firm. "This is freedom. For me, and maybe, if you learn something from this, for you too. But I will no longer be the foundation of your lies." 30 days, Daniel. 30 days, Clara. After that, the house on Oak Ridge will stand or fall on your own shoulders. Clara let out a sob so sharp it cut through the air, and Daniel lowered his face into his hands once more. I remained standing, steady as stone, even as my heart trembled with the weight of everything I had lost, and everything I had finally gained. My voice. Daniel lifted his head slowly, his face streaked with tears, his voice cracking like a child's. "Mama, please, don't leave us like this. I'll do better. I promise. I'll get another job. I'll fix everything." His words tumbled out desperately, but I had heard promises before. Too many of them. They had become like old coins in my pocket, once valuable, now worthless from being handled too many times. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice carrying both sorrow and steel, "how many times have you told me that? How many nights did I sit by the phone waiting for your call, hoping you'd tell me you'd turned things around? And yet, here we are. Same tears, same promises, same broken trust. I am 80 years old, son. My time is shorter now, and I cannot spend what little strength I have left waiting on your empty words." Clara sniffled loudly, mascara streaking her cheeks. She straightened, her voice shrill once more, though trembling beneath it. "Evelyn, this isn't fair. A mother is supposed to take care of her children. You can't just decide you're done." She jabbed her finger in the air as though she could command me like a servant. I turned to her slowly, letting the silence linger before I answered. "Fair? Do you think it was fair that I worked 16-hour days so Daniel could go to college? Do you think it was fair that I sold my jewelry, one piece at a time, to keep food on the table when his father was sick? Do you think it was fair that while you mocked the curtains in my living room, those curtains had been sewn by my own hands after I gave up buying myself a winter coat?" My chest heaved, and I steadied myself with a deep breath. "Fairness has nothing to do with this. Love does, and love, Clara, is not the same as servitude." Daniel rubbed his hands together, his voice hoarse. "Mama, I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was sparing you the stress, sparing Clara the embarrassment. I didn't want anyone to see me failing." I shook my head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You weren't sparing me, Daniel. You were using me. And the worst part is, you didn't even realize it. You told yourself you were protecting us, when really, you were protecting your pride. That's what broke me, not just the lies, but the blindness to what they cost me." The air was thick with tension, each word heavy enough to crush the fragile silence that followed. Clara crossed her arms, glaring at Daniel. "So, what now? Do we just pack our things and end up on the street? Is that what you want for us, Evelyn?" I leaned on the table, my hands firm, my voice unwavering. "What I want is for you both to face reality. You've been living in a dream I paid for, and dreams built on lies will always collapse. If that house is truly yours, then you'll find a way to keep it. If it's not, then you'll learn to live within your means. Either way, you'll finally learn what it means to stand on your own feet." Daniel buried his face in his hands again, shoulders shaking. Clara muttered under her breath, pacing the length of the dining room like a restless storm. I could almost feel the walls of my home absorb the weight of this reckoning. The very same home where lullabies had once echoed, where my husband's laughter had once warmed the air. At last, I placed my palm over my chest and said quietly, "I have spent my life carrying others, my parents, my husband, my son, and for once, I need to carry myself. This is not cruelty, Daniel, it's survival. If I don't stop now, I will lose the last pieces of myself that I fought so hard to keep. The clock struck 9, its chimes slicing through the stillness. Clara stopped pacing, staring at me with wide eyes, as if she had finally realized that my decision was immovable. Daniel looked up, and though his tears kept falling, I saw something flicker in his gaze, a recognition. Perhaps, that this time was different, that his mother's love had limits, not because it had died, but because it had endured too much to remain silent any longer. Clara's breathing grew heavy, and she clutched the back of her chair as if steadying herself from a blow. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice breaking. "If you stop helping us, everyone will know. My friends, my family, they'll see that we're not who we've claimed to be. Do you have any idea what that will do to my reputation?" Her words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and shallow. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the weight of her confession sink in. Reputation. That was her fear, not hunger, not homelessness, not the collapse of her marriage, but the embarrassment of being exposed. I shook my head slowly, pressing my lips together to keep from laughing at the absurdity. "Clara, you've been worried about appearances while I've been worried about survival. You've polished your image while I've pawned my memories, and now you expect me to feel guilty for shattering the illusion you built on my back. No, that guilt belongs to you." Daniel groaned softly, dragging his hand down his face. His voice came out raw, like a man finally stripped bare. "Mama, I know I've been wrong. I know I've failed you. But if you turn away now, I don't know what I'll do. Clara doesn't know the truth about how many jobs I've lost. I told her 3, but it's been 5 in the past 2 years. 5. And I can't seem to hold on to anything." His words shook, and for a moment he looked like that small boy again, the one who used to climb into my lap when the world felt too big. The confession struck Clara like lightning. She spun toward him, eyes blazing with shock. 5 jobs. 5. You told me it was just bad luck. You told me it was the company's, not you. She clutched her chest as if the truth itself had knocked the wind from her lungs. You let me live in this fantasy while you buried us deeper in lies. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to disappoint you, or Mama. So I kept pretending. I kept hoping that if I said it enough, maybe one day it would be true." I felt my knees weaken. So I lowered myself slowly back into my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. My hands rested on the table, trembling, but my voice remained firm. "Daniel, admitting the problem is the first step. But I will not be the one to carry you through the rest of it. I cannot. You need help, real help, the kind that doesn't come from your mother's savings but from your own willingness to change. Until you face that, nothing will get better." Clara shook her head in disbelief, pacing again, muttering to herself. Her flawless facade was gone, stripped down to a desperate woman clinging to her comforts. Finally, she stopped, turning toward me with renewed fire in her eyes. "You may think you're teaching us a lesson, Evelyn, but all you're doing is abandoning your own son. That's not what a mother does." Her words sliced deep, but I refused to let them wound me. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers, and whispered with a sharpness that silenced the room. "Do not tell me what a mother does. I have been a mother for 50 years. I carried Daniel into this world, against every odd. I worked my fingers raw so he could have opportunities. I gave up my youth, my dreams, my peace so he could have a future. Do not dare lecture me about motherhood. Clara, you wouldn't recognize sacrifice if it knocked on your door." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's mouth hung open, her face pale. Daniel sat trembling, staring at me as though seeing me for the first time in years, not as the frail woman he thought could be dismissed, but as the mother whose strength had carried him farther than he ever realized. I took a long breath, my chest rising and falling. "I am not abandoning you, Daniel. I am finally saving myself, and if you truly love me, you will not see this as betrayal, you will see it as the only way forward." The words settled over the room like a verdict, final and immovable. The clock ticked. The candles burned lower, And in that moment, they both knew my decision would not change. Daniel sat slumped forward, his elbows on the table, his face buried in his hands as though the weight of the truth was too heavy to bear. Clara stood rigid, arms crossed, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. The once perfect picture they tried to paint of themselves had crumbled entirely, leaving behind only the raw, unvarnished reality neither of them wanted to face. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I asked, my voice breaking the heavy silence. My hands trembled slightly as I folded them together, but my words came out steady, carried by years of pain I had swallowed down. "It isn't the money, Daniel. It isn't the lies. It's that for all these months, every time you stepped into this house, I saw the contempt in your eyes. I saw Clara criticize my food, my curtains, my very life, while she never once knew it was my sacrifice keeping her safe. And you let it happen. You let her tear me down, piece by piece, while you sat there in silence. That silence, son, cut deeper than any insult." Daniel lifted his head, tears streaking his cheeks. "Mama, I didn't mean for it to be like that. I thought I was protecting you from the truth, protecting Clara from shame. I thought if I just worked harder, something would finally click, and all of this would disappear." His voice cracked, but it didn't. "And now I've lost everything." Clara let out a bitter laugh, though it was thin and hollow. "Lost everything? No, Daniel, you've lost my respect. You lied to me. You let me play the fool. Do you have any idea how many times I told my friends you were climbing the ladder, that we were stable? And all along we were living off your mother's pension and pity." Her voice rose, shrill and jagged. "You've made me look like a fool, Daniel, and I will never forgive you for that." I turned my gaze sharply to her, my patience gone. "You speak of forgiveness, Clara, but what have you ever given to deserve it? You've built your world on appearances, and tonight those appearances shattered because the truth came to light. Don't you dare blame Daniel. Alone you enjoyed the comfort my money provided just as much. You both lived the lie. The difference is, Daniel still remembers he has a mother, even if he forgot what that meant. You've treated me like an inconvenience, a servant, someone beneath you. But hear me clearly. That ends tonight." Clara's face twisted with rage. "So what, Evelyn? You expect us to just pack up and leave, to live in some shabby apartment? That's what you think of us?" I drew in a slow breath, letting my chest rise before I answered. "What I think is that it's time you learned to live within your means. If that means a smaller place, then so be it. If it means giving up the luxuries you flaunt, then so be it. Because I will not sacrifice one more piece of myself, so you can pretend to be something you're not. The days of me carrying you are over." Daniel's voice cracked again, softer now, almost pleading. "Mama, please, don't turn your back on us. I swear, I'll change this time. I'll get help. I'll find a job, a real job, and I'll make it right. Just don't leave us with nothing." My heart clenched, because even after all the lies, all the insults, all the nights I ate canned soup to save money for them, part of me still longed to believe him. He was my son, my only child. But belief without action was a luxury I could no longer afford. "You have not been left with nothing, Daniel," I said firmly. "You have each other. You have 30 days, and you have the truth, finally, staring you in the face. What you choose to do with it, that is no longer my burden." The words echoed in the room like a closing door. Clara's jaw tightened, her fury boiling over, while Daniel sat shaking, his tears falling silently into his trembling hands. And Mai sat tall, frail in body but unbreakable in spirit. Because I knew that for the first time in years, I had reclaimed my dignity. 30 days is a long stretch when truth has finally turned on the lights. The first week slid by like molasses, slow and sticky, every day bringing a new reckoning. Clara packed 2 suitcases and left to stay with her parents after a scene on the front porch that drew curtains on the block. She said she needed space and stability, words that once sounded like ornaments and now rang like iron bells. Daniel slept on their living room floor among unopened bills and hollow promises. And for the first time since he was a boy, He called me every morning, not to beg, to report. He stood in line at a workforce office before sunrise. He took a night shift stocking pallets at a distribution center by the freeway. The kind of job he once laughed off as beneath his potential. He went to a counselor at the community clinic and sat in a small room with beige walls, and admitted, out loud, the habits that cost him 5 jobs: lateness, denial, the way shame dressed itself up as pride until it strangled the clock. In the second week he sold his watch, the one he used to polish while lying about interviews, and downgraded the car he couldn't afford. He canceled subscriptions, returned shoes still sitting in their boxes, and called the mortgage company himself. I sat by my window and listened to cicadas drilling the afternoon, and I did not reach for my purse. I prayed with my hands open, not clenched open so I wouldn't grab the steering wheel of his life again, open so I could feel the breeze of my own freedom pass through these old fingers. When Clara texted me a list of complaints, how humiliating, how unfair, how exhausting I had made her month, I sent back only one line: humility is cheaper than handbags and lasts longer. She did not reply. The third week Daniel came by with a folder, not a smile. Inside, a budget written in his own handwriting, no magic numbers, no invisible rescues. He asked me to review it, not to fix it. He asked about the recipes that carry a week on $10, beans that bloom in broth, greens that surrender in a skillet, cornbread that holds a family together when meat is only a rumor. We cooked in my narrow kitchen, shoulder to shoulder like we hadn't since he was 9, steam fogging the window, the house smelling of onion and thyme and a quieter kind of love, the kind that stands without a trumpet. He took containers home and texted a picture later, an empty plate and a thank you that didn't ask for more. By the final week he had a second part-time job driving early routes before dawn, and the supervisor at the warehouse moved his badge from probation yellow to steady blue. He called Clara's father himself, voice flat, facts straight, no pleading in it. He said the word boundaries like someone tasting a new medicine and deciding to finish the bottle. Clara came back once to collect the rest of her things. She stood in my doorway, poised and pretty and trembling, and said without meeting my eyes that she never meant to be cruel. I answered without venom that intention is a feather and impact a stone. Houses fall to stones, not feathers. She nodded, swallowed, and left. Perhaps she will grow, perhaps she will not. That is not my assignment. On the 30th day, Daniel knocked at dusk, the sky a bruise of purple above the rooftops. He handed me a receipt, his own payment to the mortgage company, and a photocopy of a counseling schedule with boxers already inked. He did not ask me to resume anything. He asked me to keep my chair by the window for when he wanted to sit and tell me about honest days and small victories. I looked at the man in front of me and saw both the boy he had been and the man he might yet become. Not because I lifted him, but because I moved aside and let him rise or fall on his own feet. We ate steaming bowls of beans at the table that had witnessed the worst of us and the first flicker of better. I did not say I told you so. I said grace. I am 80 years old, black as the soil my mother worked, and the coffee that kept her standing, and I have learned this. Love without borders is a flood. Love with borders is a river. It carves a path, it nourishes, it moves forward. I still keep my husband's picture by the radio, and when the afternoon sun catches the glass just right, I swear I see him smile as if to say, "You finally chose yourself." Choosing myself did not mean abandoning my child. It meant ending the quiet theft of my years by a story that kept repeating its worst chapter. Tonight, my house is still modest, and my curtains still sewn by my hands, but peace sits in every stitch. If Daniel keeps walking, the road will meet him. If he stops, the stillness will tell him why. Either way, the roof above us is honest now. That is enough. And to you listening, this home has room at the table. If this story found you, subscribe and pull up a chair. There's space here for the tired and the trying, for the ones learning to set boundaries without breaking their hearts. Tell our community your story in the comments. What have you carried? What have you laid down? What did you learn about love that doesn't drown you but guides you like a river? If this video helped you breathe easier, say so. If it stirred something brave in you, share it. Your voice can be the hand someone else needs to stand up.